Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to our worship and ministry series. For those of you who haven't met yet, my name is Samson. I'm a staff member here with the club. I went to school at UC Davis and graduated with a degree in food science. But now I'm just here enjoying the Lord with all of you and entering into the Word together. This morning, our fellowship will continue in the book of Exodus, and we will still continue to dwell in chapter 3 for a little bit longer. Next week, I think we'll move on. But today we have a very crucial and significant topics. And as you can see, it is on the purpose of God's calling. Now, before we get into the purpose of God's calling, a couple of things that I want to bring out first. And first of all, it is that the book of Exodus is a book concerning God's people as a corporate entity. So some of you were here last year. We went through the book of Genesis. Those stories are mainly concerning God's people as an individual. As an individual, we have a relationship with God. God come to call man as an individual. But now we come to the book of Exodus. We have to realize that God called his people collectively. So this verse that you just read, Exodus 3:7, he said, Jehovah said, I have surely seen the affliction of my people. Right? In Genesis, it's not about my people. It was about Abraham, about Isaac, about Jacob's sons. But in Exodus, it is about God's people. Brothers and sisters, today, are you God's people? Yeah. We are God's people, right? Yeah. So this book have everything to do with us, right? Again, and the second thing I want to mention is the matter of Egypt being a type of the world. And we have talked about that Egypt is a type of the world. But more specifically, actually, in the Old Testament, there are three places that typify the world. And these places typify the world in three different elements, or three different aspects. There's a matter of the sinful aspect of the world, which typified by Sodom and Gomorrah. There's also an aspect of the world of idolatry, which typified by Babylon. But we're talking about Egypt, it talks about the world in the aspect of our human livelihood. And it is an aspect that sometimes is not so clear. Is it the world? Or is it not the world? Is it worldly or it is not worldly? Because it has to do with our livelihood, something that has to do with our human living, necessity for our human living. It includes food that we eat. This morning, hopefully you get some food. If you haven't, we have lunch afterward. We need food, right? We need education. Y'all here as a students studying. We need shelters, a place of living, right? And also clothing, right? We all put on some clothes today, right? But these things, although it is a matter of necessity to our living, it could become a world to consume us, right? Today you go out there, you grab a meal, you might spend $10 or $20. You might consider, I can swipe, I don't have to spend more money. Do I really want to go spend that money, right? Or you might be invited to a feast where it might have cost you like $100, $200 for a meal. You could spend that money, right? So that's what we mean that our livelihood can become part of the world to usurp us, right? It's a matter to take these elements for our necessity, for livelihood, but it is another matter that these become part of the systematized world to consume us, right? Now, then the third aspect I want to talk about is that God's calling is with a purpose to call us to serve Him. Okay, And as human being, we cannot serve two masters, right? The Lord said we cannot serve two masters. Now that's mean besides God, we could be serving another master. And that master is Satan, who lie behind the world. And it consumes our time. It consumes our time so that we would not worship God, that we would not serve God. It consumes our inward being, our heart, occupy our heart, that we will love the world but not love God, right? So, so these are the three things that I want to bring out, right? The book of Exodus is talking about a corporate people of God. That's included all of us. In the last 2 weeks, we have been talking about Moses. But we have to realize that Moses is a representative of God's people. It is not that certain people are qualified to serve God, but maybe I'm not. But maybe I'm not. No, you have to realize that God's desire is that all his people will serve him, right? What he prepared Moses to serve God. His desire is that Moses will be a prototype, but all of his people would eventually be prepared to serve God. And that's why God called the Israelites out of Egypt, right? They were under the usurpation of Pharaoh. Pharaoh realized that they were growing. What he did is to assign taskmaster to put them to work harder, less material, less resources, but produce more, right? Doesn't sound like some of your professor. Give you a more difficult problem set. Turn it in earlier. Or your work, some of you are working, deadline is always coming, more projects. If you can do one thing, he asks you to do two things. You do two things, he asks you to do four things. Well, as God's people, we have to realize that our living is not to serve the master of the world, but our living is to serve God as our master. And so these two verses, Exodus 3:7 and 8, as you can see, that Israelites were under the tyranny of the Egyptians. They were laboring hard. There were sorrows. They were oppressed. So God have seen that, and God's desire. God is now calling them out of Egypt to bring them out of that land to a good and spacious land, a land that is flowing with milk and honey. So I hope by the end of today we'll see what is this land, good and spacious, flowing with milk and honey. Okay, I'll skip these three verses. These three verses in Ephesians, 1 Corinthians, and Romans tell us that, in this New Testament age, we have a hope of a calling. Yeah. And we are called into the fellowship of his Son, Jesus Christ, our Lord. Amen. We're called into a fellowship with our Lord Jesus Christ. And Romans 8:28 tells us that all things work together for good, to those who love God, to those who are called according to his purpose. Right? So even in the New Testament, we have this sense that we are called according to God's purpose. Everything, environment, all things, good things, bad things, things that's in our environment, is arranged by God because we are called for his purpose. Okay, so point one here is that as revealed in Exodus, the purpose of God's calling was, so we have a fivefold purpose of God's calling, as we can see in the book of Exodus. The first point is to deliver the children of Israel, God's chosen people, out of the tyranny of the Egyptians and out of Egypt, the land of bondage. You're all here to pursue an education, right? And just consider 5, 6 months ago, some of you who are freshmen, Today, you got your Cal acceptance. Maybe you're excited about coming to Cal, the top rank public university, top-notch, world-class education. You have a bright future. Well, now you're here. Rubber meet the road, right? Has midterm come up yet? Even these past weeks, I begin to see some of you begin to have a cry within. Class pressure. It might not even just be from the classes. It might just be from your peer. You saw that your roommates or people in your floor, they have so many other activities. Or you go on Sprout Hall, all these clubs. Do I need to join some of these ones? Do I need to join a consulting club? I never thought I would be interested in one, but everyone that's doing it, maybe I'm missing out. Maybe I'm behind if I don't do one. Then there's a cry. This verse said, now the cry of the children of Israel has come to me. Well, be sure that your cry is heard by God, has come to God. He has seen the oppression with which the Egyptians oppressed them. And God told Moses, so come now, I will send you to Pharaoh that you may bring my people. Bring my people. Put your name in there, right? Bring Emlyn, bring Ethan, right? Out of Egypt, that is out of being usurped by the world of our livelihood. And then point B is that to bring God's chosen people into the wilderness, a place of separation. And I say this is a place of separation from the world. So for God's people to go from Egypt to the wilderness, they had to pass through the Red Sea. And once they passed through the Red Sea, the story, Moses split the Red Sea. They all went through, and all the Egyptian soldier chariots were just buried in the Red Sea. Now in the wilderness, they're separated from Egypt. They're separated from Egypt. God's people, after you're saved, you have to be separated. You have to be separated. And I'm not saying that you have to just get out, drop out from school and be separated. Go to an actual wilderness to just live there. But even consider this morning, for you to be here, isn't it a separation? Right? If you're not here, what would you be doing? You might be just cramming another chapter, doing another practice test, but you might not actually need to spend that extra 1 or 2 hours to do that, right? And some of you, maybe you live in a dorm, you have a sense that certain activity out there, you just don't want to mingle with that. You have a sense that I need to be separated from this activity, certain activities that are going on here and there. Well, as God's people, don't we have a sense we're a holy people? That's when we're sanctified, separated unto God. Right? So God brought his people into the wilderness, a place of separation from the world. And then point 3 is that to bring God's chosen people to the mountain to serve God. Okay, this is verse 12. In chapter 3, he said, when you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will serve God upon this mountain. So actually, after the Israelites left Egypt, entering into wilderness, one of the first things that God did was call Moses to the mountain. And what happened up in the mountain is that he received a revelation concerning God's eternal purpose. More specifically, in the book of Exodus, Moses received 2 things. The law, the 10 commandments, and also a vision concerning how the tabernacle is going to be built in every details. it spent 4 chapters to talk about the law and ordinances. And then it spent another 6 chapters to talk about all the details of the tabernacles. So what are these 2 things? The law, you might think that, it's just things about do's and don'ts, as God's people, what you should do, what you should not do. But actually, more than that, the law unveiled to us who the lawmaker is. Consider our nation. When it was formed, there was the Constitution, right? And at that time, the Constitution, today it still means a lot, but at that time, it was what defined what an American is, right? It defined the core value of an American, which is, we're not Europeans, we're American. The law defined the person who writes it, right? So actually, for God to give Moses and God's people the commandments, the law, and ordinances, God was unveiling to his people who he is. Okay, I don't have time to go into details. We'll get into it later on in the semester. But I just mentioned one thing. The first commandment is that, I'm Jehovah, your God, and no other gods shall you serve. And then a couple of verses later, he said, for I am a jealous God. So, practically, we worship one God. But actually, through that, we realize that our God is a jealous God. He wants us to be his people, and he wants to be our God, right? Okay, the second thing is about the tabernacle. The tabernacle is God's dwelling place on earth. So before the book of Exodus, God didn't have a dwelling place on earth. Some of you were here last semester. We talked about Jacob. When he fled from his home, he found a rock and he took a nap on it, and then he got a dream and had a revelation that after the dream, he flipped it upside down or right side up, and then anointed it, poured oil on it. He called that place Bethel, the house of God. But house of God cannot be just a piece of rock, right? Or to realize that God desired to come to dwell with man. That's what the dream is about. God's desire to come to dwell with man. He needs to have a dwelling place on earth. So now God has his people. His people came out of Egypt, separated. Now they're in the wilderness. They need to receive a revelation that I want to dwell with you. God wants to dwell with us. Even as we study Matthew, right, chapter 1, his name is Emmanuel, God with us, right? But a house is not that simple, Maybe not many of you are owning a house yet, but you will have a lot of consideration, where to buy it, how to remodel it, what color is your paint, what furniture to put in. All your furniture will express who you are, right? Your personality. So actually, God, that's why it takes so much time for God to unveil to the Israelites, to Moses, the details of his house. Okay, I move on to point D, is that to build a tabernacle to be God's dwelling place on earth. Then the rest of the book of Exodus is just about the Israelites actually building the house of God, okay? And here toward the end of the book of Exodus, chapter 40, I think we just all read this together, 33 and 34.
So Moses finished the work, then the cloud covered the tent of meeting,
and the glory of Jehovah filled the tabernacle. The glory of Jehovah filled the tabernacles. After the tent was finished, completed, Jehovah come and filled the tabernacle. he can now dwell with man. You know, this is the most glorious things that we can experience. You know, to score a touchdown at a football game yesterday, it wasn't that glorious compared to this. I mean, this is just glorious. Glory is just God's presence. To have God's presence with us is glorious. You know, every time when we gather as believers, we should have the sense that God's presence is with us. His glory fills us, right? Okay, but you have to realize that the tent is still only a tent. If you look in the history of the Israelites, eventually, actually the next first king, about 480 years, the first time King Solomon built a physical solid temple as a house of God. And this time, not in the wilderness, the tent in the wilderness, the Israelite would carry it and travel around for 40 years. Can you imagine a tent? I mean, it's not just a tent that you go camping, but this is a big camp. The Israelite would carry around, walk around with it. But eventually, what God's desire is to bring his people into the land of Canaan, and where eventually he will build his temple. And God, in Exodus 3:8, he called this land, a good and spacious land. You know, when God say something is good, it gotta be good, right? I mean, if I told you a restaurant is good, you might be skeptical, you know, maybe it's just personal preference, right? But when God says something is good, it is good. Okay, and it's flowing with milk and honey. What is it? Okay, first, the next verse, how about we read this, Colossians 1:12 together? Okay, so this verse in the New Testament show us we are qualified for a share of the allotted portion. And that portion is referring to Christ as our enjoyment. And because Paul used the word allotted portion, he's actually telling us that the land, the good land in the Old Testament, is a type of Christ. Amen. If you want to know Christ, the picture would help us. Okay? So in Exodus 3:8, it says, this land is flowing with milk and honey. You know, milk and honey typify two aspects of the life of Christ. It typifies his redeeming aspect and the generating aspect, which means with Christ's life, we have redemption. Brothers and sisters, we all have been saved, right? We have experienced redemption. We also have been regenerated. That means God's life has come into us, right? So we have been saved out of the world, and we received the life of God. Now, but this land is flowing with milk and honey. So you might think that, well, redemption and regeneration is just experienced once for all. Once you have done it, that's it. Well, but actually, no. Every day, don't you still need to be redeemed from the world, right? When you consider what clothes to buy, you know, are you going to buy the more expensive piece, or you would just consider before the Lord what I really need, right? When you consider how you spend your time, you know, we still need to be redeemed by Christ daily, right? And we still need to enjoy Christ as our life daily by enjoying his word, right? So there are a couple of verses in 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 2, it says, as newborn babes, talking about new believers, as newborn babes, long for the guileless milk of the word, right? That by it you may grow, right? To come to the word, to eat the word, to enjoy the word, pray over it. It will help us to grow in our spiritual life. And then honey, this verse in Psalms 119, 103, it says, your word The psalmist said, your word is sweet to my mouth, sweeter than honey, right? The word, it's not that you read it for one day, you got saved, you got it enough. I can just put it down and live my Christian life without this book. But no, this book is food to us as Christians. We can open it, enjoy it, pray over it. I was just considering, as I was preparing this verse, Exodus 3:9, on the point A, it said, now the cry of the children of Israel has come to me. You just apply it to your situation. No, my cry, maybe I have some stress, anxiety, there's some cry within me, maybe a certain situation I'm going through. Oh, but God heard my cry. God heard my cry. This verse is good because it's promised us that God hears us and He will come to save us, to bring us to a good land to enjoy Him. Amen. May we come to the Word that we would also have this experience, right? Okay, point 2 is say that in typology, bringing the children of Israel into Canaan, a good land, signifies bringing people into the all-inclusive Christ with His unsearchable riches. So we have to realize that the land, the good land, is actually the most complete type, picture of who Christ is in the New Testament. We have 4 gospels in the New Testament. That's because Christ is not that simple as a person. To just use one biography to talk about Christ, it's not enough. We need 4. And to know how to experience Christ in all His different aspects, we need the rest of the Bible. Obviously, I don't have time to expound everything, how Christ is unsearchably rich, how He is all-inclusive, but maybe we can look into this next verse, Deuteronomy 8:7-10. This is right before the Israelites were going to enter into the good land. This is after 40 years sojourning in the wilderness. They were about to enter the good land. Moses was not qualified to go in because of some mistake, failure that he had. But he spoke this word to the Israelite as an encouragement. How about we just alternate brothers, guys and girls, we can read. Guys can start with verse 7. Jehovah, your God, is bringing you to a good land, a land of water brooks, a spring as of fountains, flowing forth in valleys and in mountains.
A land of wheat and barley and vines and fig trees and pomegranates, a land of olive trees with oil and of honey.
A land in which you will eat bread without scarcity, you will not lack anything in it. A land whose stones of iron, from whose mountains you can mine copper.
And you shall eat and be satisfied, and you shall bless Jehovah your God for the land which He has given you.
So, this land is more than just milk and honey. That's a lot more than that. Water flowing forth, valleys and mountains. Wheat, barley. What are these things? These are good, Land we can eat bread without scarcity. Some of you might have unlimited swipe at the dining hall. This is much better than that. I don't know how much you would like that food at the dining hall, but this got to be good. You would not lack anything in it. And then there's something more solid: stone, iron, coppers that can be used for building, right? Well, Ephesians 3:8, Paul tells us that his gospel is to announce the unsearchable riches of Christ. So we have to realize that all these items typifying different aspects of the gospel. And because time is limited, I just give you maybe a couple examples, okay? This matter of, okay, this land is a land of wheat. You know, wheat in the New Testament, the Lord said, unless a grain of wheat dies and falls on the ground, it abides alone. But if it dies, it bears much fruit. A wheat, well, basically, the Lord telling us that He is the wheat of grain, right? The wheat of grain typified the limited life of Jesus, okay? Which means God, the infinite God, limit Himself into a person, finite person, a man. How restricted that could be. You can't imagine because, we are not God. We don't know what it's like to be unlimited. But He limited Himself into a finite man. And He was crucified and He was buried. His life is fully able to be restricted. Brothers and sisters, do we have experience that we're just restricted? Maybe even just, you want to take that class, but it's full. You just can't take it. You just can't take it. You want to take it, but you can't take it. You're limited, you're restricted, Or you want to go to eat a certain restaurant, but your friend doesn't want to, So rather than just go a different way, right? You just follow, right? Anyway, just consider our life, we're restricted, Maybe even this afternoon you got to go back to study, You want to go play. Some of us going to play volleyball, but I need to go study. A little bit restricted. Well, our human life is full of restriction, right? Even though we want freedom, but we have to recognize that our life is full of restriction. If we would just contact the Lord, right? We realize that, He's an infinite God who become a finite man. And because His life is in us, He also supply us with that aspect, that character of that life, that we would be content with being restricted. We don't just try to go my own way, but we'll be content to be restricted. And not just to be restricted, Christ is also the land of Bali. If some of you are familiar with this story, that the Lord feed 5,000 people with 5 loaves and 2 fish. And I don't know if you realize that 5 loaves are 5 barley loaves. How do 5 barley loaves feed more than 5,000 and still have 12 baskets full at the end? That's a sign that the life of Christ is also an unlimited life. A life in resurrection is unlimited. So on the one hand, He enables us to be content with our environment. But on the other hand, at the same time, He supply us with Himself, that with His resurrection life, that we don't feel lack. We don't feel lack. Like this verse, I say, you will eat bread without scarcity, no lack in anything. Yeah. It's not just learn to be content, but also that you will enjoy Christ as our supplying grace, right? So Colossians, the last verse here, Colossians 2:6 and 7, is that, therefore you have received the Christ Jesus the Lord, walk in Him. He is the Lamb. Walk in Him, right? Every day, maybe we have a daily walk, walking to class, doing mundane things, ordinary days, but we can walk in Him. We can bring the Lord into our life. We can apply Him into all situations, right? We're not just being enslaved in Egypt, being oppressed, suppressed, and depressed, but we can walk in Him. There's still going to be valley, but if there's valley, there's the water, the river, the flow. the water of life will supply us. And that life is just Christ himself. The secret is that we have to come to him, contact him, pray, turn our heart to him. So, and eventually, God's purpose in his land is that there will be the building. And I didn't read this verse earlier, but 1 Peter 2:5 is that you yourselves also, as living stones, are being built up as a spiritual house into a holy priesthood to offer up spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. So today, God's building is not a physical temple. It is us. We're both the building and the priest. We serve God as God's house, right? But the secret is that we have to walk in this land. The temple is not built in the wilderness. It's in a good land. In a good land. We have to enjoy Christ, enjoy the Lord. May the Lord be so rich to us as we go on in our Christian walk.
Making at the